I am Justin Kindle, the editor of Brewbound, and we are still talking about how the COVID-19 outbreak is affecting the beer industry and how the industry is navigating it. And our next panel features three men who, along with their organizations, have worked hard to build up this industry to $328 billion in economic activity, and what was 70,000 direct jobs and 2.1 million overall jobs, according to the last Beer Serves America report. And in a matter of weeks, we have seen the industry take a major hit. And we're going to talk about it with the three leaders from the trade groups. They're going to give you a feel for how their constituencies have been affected. Joining us now are Bob Pease, the president and CEO of the Brewers Association. Bob, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure, Justin. Great to be here. Thanks for the opportunity, and thanks to Brewbound for bringing the community together, and certainly a shout out to Sam Dogfish Head for supporting Brew Talks.
We've also got Craig Purser, the president and CEO of the National Beer Wholesalers Association. Craig, thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Justin. I'm looking forward to a good conversation. It's terrific to be together. You know, this industry is all about the people. And what do we do when we can't be together? We improvise.
Well, we were supposed to be at your legislative conference right now. So,
as a matter of fact, we were supposed to be at our legislative conference. We were supposed to have our Cheers beer and food event with all of our friends on Capitol Hill. And we were supposed to be at opening day of the World Series Washington Nationals, but that got interrupted as well.
And also joining us is Jim McGreevy, the president and CEO of the Beer Institute. Jim, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Justin. Thanks. It's great to be here. Thanks to you for putting this on. Thanks to Sam and others for sponsoring it. I think it's really important for the three of us as the three trade association CEOs to be together, to talk to you, to talk to so many people, 900 plus people at this moment, about these issues. The beer business has been turned upside down in the last 3 weeks, and likely will continue to be turned upside down for the next several weeks or months. So thanks for the opportunity to be here. And I'm super glad to be with my counterparts at the Brewers Association and the wholesalers.
Well, I really appreciate you three taking the time out, because I know you're super busy with trying to keep everything afloat in the industry. And I'd like to get a perspective from each of you on how your respective constituencies have been affected and the kind of phone conversations that you guys have been having over the past week. How are your constituencies doing? You know, what are you hearing from your members? What do they need the most right now? And I'll start with you, Bob.
Thanks, Justin. You know, for the Brewers Association, who represents the small and independent craft brewing community, the impacts of COVID-19 have been, you know, in a word, devastating. 71%. Let me back up. There's just a little over 8,000 breweries in the United States right now, right, including large brewers, small brewers, brew pubs, tap rooms. 71% of those 8,000 breweries are brew pubs and tap rooms. So a little over 5,800 breweries, brew pubs or tap rooms. The impact on them has been simply one of, you know, chaos. Their ability to do on-premise sales is down, you know, over 85%. And they are trying to weather the storm the best they can until we come out of the pandemic. You know, we've done some good surveying through our chief economist Bart Watson, and you know, every brewer that's responded has seen a significant decline in their business. If this lasts a month, 6 weeks, then many of them, I think, will be able to survive. But if this goes 2 months, 4 months, 6 months, then there's going to be a significant toll. We've asked our members, you know, how many of them are looking at potential layoffs. We're looking at over 60% of our of our membership who responded to that survey indicating they're going to have to lay people off. And, so this is right coming on the heels of when we usually we release our industry impact numbers with regards to, the impact on craft and the American economy and on the beer community. And we're poised to say, craft is 14% of the market by volume, 25% of the market by dollars. We increased our direct job count by over 10,000. So 160,000 Americans employed at, either production craft breweries, brew pubs, or tap rooms. And now this has all kind of come to a screeching halt.
Jim, what are you hearing from Beer Institute members?
I spoke to a small brewer in our membership last week, Justin, who told me that every day presents a new set of challenges for him just to keep the doors open. And I've been hearing that from a lot of brewers of all different sizes. I think Sam said in your earlier panel that he's trying to stay in the moment in terms of dealing with issues and spending some time thinking about the future, but really more trying to stay in the moment. And I feel like a lot of brewers to do that, but distributors are trying to do the same, sort of deal with the issues that are put in front of them every day, but then also trying to figure out how the policy space can help them achieve what they need to achieve to keep the doors open. So we've been spending a lot of time talking to brewers in our membership, talking to Bob, talking to Craig, trying to figure out ways that we could work with them, work with others in the food and beverage space to help our members. For us at the Beer Institute, really, we're taking a threefold approach to what we're doing these days. We're trying to figure out how we can help through policy initiatives on the federal level. We saw phase 3 last week. We'll see phase 4 coming here in the next few weeks. How we can help our members and the industry keep going by using federal policy. How we really can collaborate with these two great organizations that are on the panel with us now, along with how we can work with the food and beverage industry at large to remain essential, to figure out issues that come up every day. And then the third way really is to be a resource for our members through weekly conference calls, weekly webinars, and information sharing that we can do to tell people what's happening in Washington, D.C. But, I've been talking to members really for the last 2.5 weeks, and they're really trying to figure out what every day brings while trying to see what the future brings. The problem is we don't know how long this is going to last, as Bob said. If it's 2 or 3 weeks, then, maybe we can survive. If it's any longer, it gets more difficult. So I think staying in the moment, figuring out the ways that the trade associations can work together to help the industry is super important.
Craig, what's the word from NBWA members right now?
Well, really for the first 2 weeks or so, one of the things that we were all working on together was the whole notion of making sure that the regular, at least the off-premise channels, were serviced. And that means getting our industry included as what was defined as essential. And that was done just about 2 weeks ago by the Department of Homeland Security, and we got some guidance along those lines. We saw 2 areas where our members could be relevant. One was in the transportation space, and the other was in the agriculture space. And so we were very pleased to see that kind of as a first objective of the association. The thought is if we don't have folks in breweries making beer, and we don't have folks being able to get the beer on retail shelves, this isn't going to be helpful at all. Even though there's been such displacement and such disruption for so many brewers specifically, and so many independent retailers. When you take 20% of the account base of the beer industry and you close it, that's unbelievable. But even preceding that, we had a real problem as it relates to, this was really the worst time in the beer calendar for this kind of shock to occur to the system. We had beer that was positioned all over the country for all the spring events, St. Patrick's Day, March Madness, opening day for baseball, all of the pro sports leagues. all of the spring activities in college campuses and marketplaces that love to celebrate what's going on in the with the spring of the year, you had this just horrible dynamic. And so kind of our second objective was to be sure that we had the opportunity for as much inventory to be moved around as could. And we were pleased to see TTB step in very quickly with some guidance, at least from the federal level, about folks being able to reposition beer products. So that was very positive. And then our third objective has really been around providing that assistance, support, sharing best practices, constantly communicating with our members. But the reality is this is unprecedented. This is really, really difficult. We had our first fatality from COVID-19 late last week in New York City, as we saw the first casualty, at least that I'm aware of, in the beer industry in the form of a 40-something-year-old professional from Manhattan Beers. And when you have that kind of, and I don't think this is going to be the last fatality that affects our industry, but it really helps bring it home, and it puts in perspective how serious this challenge is that's in front of us.
Absolutely. I have a friend who lives in Madrid, Iowa, my hometown, and I got the message yesterday that he was in the hospital. He's on oxygen, and he's hopefully on the mend. But this disease is going to touch everyone. There's just no question about it. In some way, like, you're going to know somebody, you're going to hear about somebody. It's going to touch everybody that we know. So, I guess I want to jump off of what you just talked about too, Craig, is the timing of this and how bad that is. And you did a great job of breaking that down. You know, there's a lot of sacrifice that has gone on here. And I think everyone can probably agree that shutting down the on-premise and own-premise was the right thing to do to stop the spread, bend the curve, and not overwhelm the healthcare system. But it comes with sacrifice. And you ticked it off. NBA and NHL games, March Madness, opening day, and MLB games. The arena sales alone lost in this have to be massive, let alone what someone like Buffalo Wild Wings, which is the largest pourer of draft beer in the U.S., what they lost. And then you add on to that the loss of St. Patrick's Day sales, mostly. Some things still went on, unfortunately, but you know, the vast majority of those events got canceled. So I would ask you, Craig, and then Jim, do you have an indication of just the amount of potential sales that this industry has sacrificed?
I don't think we're going to have that number for a little bit of time, because you know, this was met with just a gigantic shift from the on-premise to the off. We saw pantry loading like we've not seen in our lifetimes. We saw a couple of weeks that were unbelievable as it relates to a wide variety of brands that haven't seen growth for years, that all of a sudden saw people going and pulling a big format of that product, because you know that's what folks do when they're planning for, you know, to be sequestered or be, you know, in this case quarantined. You know, they go for a value pack perhaps, or they go for more volume for the short term. So I don't think we have those numbers crunched, but they're staggering. And also, you know, they're you know, I think it's so important as advocates in this industry that we also recognize that this is not just us. I mean, this is everybody, not just in our nation and in our economy, but on our planet. So all of these businesses have been interrupted. You know, it doesn't matter whether you sell automobiles or you are a dental hygienist. You probably didn't work for the last 2 weeks, and that kind of cross section has an amazing impact on the American economy. And we've got to be very, very thoughtful as it relates to how we advocate around those losses.
Jim, we've seen 3 relief packages passed so far, and we're likely to see a 4th. And I'm going to guess that there's going to be a 5th and possibly more after that. What further relief would you like to see in the next aid package?
I think just to partially answer your other question, it's unclear to us at this moment how to quantify or what the impact is on beer generally. We obviously see a huge, as Craig said, a huge increase in the off-premise, which is helping many people stay in business. But we also have a great amount of expired, unmerchantable beer at this point. So I think one of the things that's very important, one of the things that Julie brought up in the last segment, was to do something do something policy-wise about all of that unmerchantable beer. So a tax credit has been proposed by all three of us. We were working on that. Certainly, we don't know every jot and tittle about how we can get that into phase 4, but I think that's certainly very important for us to all be working on in phase 4. But I think what Craig said is also very important for us to all recognize. This is affecting every aspect of American life. We need to be sensitive as advocates to what that means for us when we're going to talk to folks. We need to be reasonable about what it is that we're asking for. Certainly, a tax credit of some kind is very reasonable for us to ask for. We also saw for brewers yesterday, the TTB defer excise tax payments for 3 months. Another seemingly very reasonable thing in our view. That could need to be extended for another 3 months. So I think we definitely have certain things that we should be looking for in a phase 4 bill. Phase 3 was about economic stimulus. There was always a sense that phase 4 would be about helping specific industries. We remain essential as a part of the American grocery system. Very important to continue to remain essential as well. So I think we can never really take our eye off the ball of keeping that essential designation. We have seen in other countries, some very close to our borders, what that means when you are deemed not essential. So keeping our essential designation, working on very specific issues in phase 4, but also at the same time, continuing to monitor and listen and communicate to our members about what they're looking for, because we're hearing of new issues every day that we need to think about a policy solution for.
Bob, I'd ask you the same question. What are the biggest needs for small and independent craft brewers right now in a potential 4th bill?
All as Craig and Jim have referenced, we're united on seeking the tax credit for out-of-code draft beer in the market. As we all know, small and independent brewers over-index at on-premise retail on draft. This is a critical issue for many of my members. So we're hopeful that we can join and present ourselves as a unified front, and keep in mind that it's not just the brewing industry, but it's also the hospitality industry, and that want to make sure that in all of our messaging that we are incorporating the impact on the retail tier. It's got to be all 3 tiers as we advocate for our respective priorities. Supplier tier, distributor tier, and retailer tier, because we need those retailers to be there when we come out of this. And certainly there's a concern from our end that a lot of them won't be. Specifically on phase 4 asks, a suspension or waiver of federal excise tax payments through end of 2020 or even 2021. Draft Beverage Modernization Tax Reform Act permanency would also be on our short list of priorities. This is a good time. I don't think the government wants to be letting the current rates expire given the current economic situation. If we can't get excise taxes waived and we could get a deferral, then the repayment needs to be very incremental and very slow. Those payroll protection loans that are in the CARES Act, PPP, very important. We need to continue to have those. We'd like to see those forgiven. Love to see prevent unemployment insurance rates from increasing due to COVID. We don't know what's around the next corner. We could come out of this in a couple of months, and then a lot of the information that I'm reading indicates that we're going to have another wave of the virus in the fall and in the early winter. And until there's a vaccine, we could be on an up and down. We could be on an elevator going up and down. So all of these things super important to us. as we, we're up on the Hill every day, delivering our message to congressional champions who absolutely want to help the beer industry, small and independent brewers. They understand the economic impact that our businesses, our members have to every state, every community, virtually every congressional district in this country.
I want to remind our viewers too, you can send us questions, ask@brewbound.com. That's ask@brewbound.com. Or you can text us 617-336-8560, 617-336-8560. One of the things that you guys mentioned is you being sympathetic or at least realizing that, everyone's asking for assistance at this point. And that's one question that I wanted to fire at you, Jim. With so many industries in need of relief right now, how challenging is it to get lawmakers' attention right now?
Gosh, Justin, we have seen really at all levels of government, federal, state, and local, we have seen policymakers who want to help us. They want to help beer. They know the numbers that Bob talks about for craft brewing and for the beer industry in general in the United States. You mentioned them earlier, $328 billion in economic activity. So I think, at least I have found, and my team has found, a very open door and very wide ears listening to what we need. So you have to sort of get in the give and take and the hurly-burly of the legislative process, and we as advocates have to watch what's happening and figure out how we want to position ourselves and then react to the changing environment. But I do find policymakers up and down the chain very interested in helping beer.
Bob, you mentioned the efforts with the TTB, and just the other day they postponed tax payments and filing deadlines, and you sent a letter asking them to waive penalties for excise tax filings and payments for businesses impacted by COVID-19. How difficult or how big of an ask, I guess, is that waiver for, at the very least, the length of the forced shutdowns?
Anything, Justin, that's going to put cash back into the pockets of small and independent brewers right now is critical. One of the things that you asked early on is, what do our members need? Well, when we were, first navigating this labyrinth 2 weeks ago, the first number one answer that all of our members got back to us with was, we need a cash infusion. We need something that allows us to pay our rent, to meet payroll, so we don't have to lay off our workers or, go into arrears with our landlord. So that's one element of that answer. The other element I would say is I certainly want to give a shout out to Mary Ryan, acting administrator at the TTB, and everyone on her team for their responsiveness. They're under the gun and they're being deluged just like all of we are. But they have been very responsive to the Brewers Association. And yeah, I would say that's the first time in my career that we sent in a letter on Tuesday and we got an answer on Thursday. So I think it's just an example of how everybody's trying to get in the boat together, row in the same direction, and work together. They're our regulator, but they're not the enemy, and they are working with us. And we were just really pleased to see that response come in so quickly.
Craig, you've really hammered home, and Jim, you've hammered home the point about the beer industry being considered essential and maintaining that designation. And our friends at Beer Business Daily reported today that there's some question, or in Mexico, whether that's going to be the case for their brewing industry. Do you envision a scenario where that could happen here?
I don't want to go back in time and try to predict that. And I will tell you, we were very strategic in the way that we advocated around getting that essential designation. That first weekend that this issue kind of came to rise, which would have been the weekend of about the 13th, 14th of March, just less than 3 weeks ago. that we were all communicating with one another and beginning to feel, oh my goodness, there is going to be some federal restriction on where we're going. We're beginning to see some local jurisdictions take some matters in their own hands. We were seeing governors, I think, truly lead, and they're probably going to be viewed as doing an awful lot to mitigate some of the spread of this from a health standpoint. But we began to see this necessity that would eventually come out, and we knew it would be the Department of Homeland Security that would be offering some guidance on what businesses were deemed essential. And one of the things we did was we worked with our state associations to arm them with many very and different talking points depending on who the constituency was. If it was a public health official that they were interfacing with, there was a different, all these were complementary messages, but it might have been different than a law enforcement message. It might have been different than someone, from the governor's office. And so we kind of had this as a very quick objective. And I had calls back from other industry partners, and Jim and I were on the phone late one night with some industry partners outside of alcohol. And they said, well, why don't we just say it? Why don't we just say alcohol or beer? And our thought was, no, because the minute that you raise that attention, you have a different kind of conversation. So as we look at what Mexico's doing, and it does appear to be, at least this earliest version of this order, at least the retail trade is posting signs saying that distribution and manufacture is not essential. Obviously, that means retail as well. I saw some video from the marketplace. Lines are forming, lines of cars that look like the fuel crisis of the 1970s. People waiting in line to buy beer. Same thing inside the beer stores. But I do know that our partners and the folks that are working on this are working very hard to turn that order around. And I always remind people, when you're dealing with government officials or somebody on the other side, always give them the opportunity to change their mind and turn around. I think that this is not a very well thought plan. I know that Mexico's dealing with a lot of different issues, but I know those of us on behalf of distributors, retailers, and consumers of a number of those fine products, they're interested in having those, being produced so that we can get those products back to market.
Jim, what does the beer industry need to do to reinforce that notion of essential?
I think we definitely need to make sure that we put the beer in the context of American manufacturing and American grocery. We are very important to the market basket in grocery stores, in convenience stores, in all types of stores around the country. We are part of American manufacturing. I think that is an important thing for us to be talking about. It's important for us to be talking about we are part of American agriculture. And there are other groups in the manufacturing, agriculture, food and beverage sector who understand the importance of beer being produced and distributed and sold. So I think keeping that essential designation comes from showing our value to those people, showing our value to policymakers up and down the line, from congressmen to folks at TTB to members of state legislatures and local city councils. So we constantly have to be talking about how we fit into the American scene in terms of who we are as an industry. And I think that's going to help us continue to have this essential designation. I think we also, as essential, have to be thinking about how to keep our workers safe inside the production facilities and inside the distribution warehouses. So this idea of PPE that folks need is becoming a more and more prevalent discussion, I think, inside beer. So we have to continually change with the discussion that's happening around the disease, but also make sure we are firmly planted inside the American landscape in terms of manufacturing, agriculture, and grocery.
Bob.
Justin, if I could, I'd jump in there real quick and certainly echo everything that my colleagues have said. But a message that's worked for us with state and local regulators on this issue is that beer is food. And I think that's a message that is easy to understand, and it's easy to drive home. For us, we found that most state and local governments. I never heard of this agency before we started down this road, but the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. That's a federal agency that held that all food manufacturing, distribution, and retailing constitutes an essential service. So we've been able to push out that message to our state guild leaders, who can then go take that to their state officials or local officials and point to that, along with the notification from the Homeland Security Office and the Homeland Security Agency that, food manufacturing is essential, beer is food, and we've been able to make some positive inroads on that. We've been able to assist in a few cases where you've got state jurisdictions, local jurisdictions kind of contradicting each other. Certainly, I'm sure some of you guys saw the instance in Denver, where initially the mayor ruled that retail, off-premise retail, not essential, and they were going to close all the locations that sold beer off-premise. And there was a minor riot for a short period of time. We were able to get some of this information from CISA and from Homeland Security into the hands of the Colorado Brewers Guild, who in turn was able to get that to their contacts in the mayor's office, and cooler heads prevailed, and onward we go, and with being part of being deemed an essential service to the American food and beverage consumer.
We're getting some audience questions in here on that essential business designation. Someone wants to know, if deemed non-essential and alcohol sales ceased, would this essentially be a de facto prohibition? I'll go to you, Craig.
Yeah, I don't know if we want to use those words. I mean, the whole notion of public health and safety really is important. And I think that's one thing we've got to keep in mind when I talk about serious and I talk about sensitive and I talk about sober. I mean it. I mean, we don't know what the circumstances could look like, and we've got to maintain respect for these policymakers that are making these calls in very difficult situations. But the whole idea is, when we're making the case for being essential, the part of the wonderful thing about beer is it does bring people together, and even if we can't physically come together, it is a shared experience. It is something that unites us as a celebration. And as difficult as the next few weeks are going to be, we're going to need as much normalcy as we possibly can have. And so I think reminding folks that ability to enjoy a beer after a long, hard day of whatever it is that you may be doing has never been more important. I participated in something I never thought I'd do last Friday night. I had a Zoom happy hour with 10 of my fraternity brothers from 30 plus years ago at the University of Oklahoma. And I tell you, it was very unusual. There's a lot of tension of the folks that were assembled in the Zoom room. Nobody had lost their job, but everybody's company were in the process of making big cuts. I'm afraid in 2 weeks when we do the next one of those, that's not going to be the case. So I mention that because I don't think these policy decisions, should alcohol be determined to be not essential, we shouldn't go there. We need to recognize how serious this is and use it in a respectful way. Another argument as it relates to this is, you started, Justin, by talking about the 70,000 folks that are directly employed in the brewing industry. Well, in the distribution industry, it's 142,000 people. And so that whole argument and that whole reminder of jobs and the reminder that this industry at large puts a lot of groceries on everybody's table every single week has to be something that we lead with as well.
We're getting a question for clarification on the expired beer tax credit for out-of-code beer. Are you talking about the crediting out the value of the keg beer, or are we talking excise tax on the keg beer?
So the earliest thought around this, and the letter that we put down and shared with the Speaker of the House and with the Majority Leader of the Senate together, all three organizations accompanied by America's Beverage Licensees. That's the organization that represents both the on and the off-premise retailers, talked about the idea of being able to take a credit based on the value of the product of whoever was holding the product when it codes, when it expires. And the idea is we're all going to be working together for the next number of weeks and months to get this product accounted for. Obviously, if it's draft beer, there may be an opportunity to repurpose that. I've been thrilled to see a number of leading brewers talk about sharing that burden with distribution, as distributors we're legal taking that product back. That's an awesome reminder of how great this industry. A number of folks have announced that they're going 50-50 split, some of them better as it relates to that expiring beer. But the idea behind the policy proposal is to provide the holder of that inventory with a credit for the value of that product. It's not going to do anything except for perhaps keep more people employed. If you're a small brewer and you have $10 or $20 or $30,000 worth of beer in inventory, if you're able to declare that as a credit, you can take that credit to the bank and perhaps keep your doors open. If you're a distributor and it's as much as $1 million in inventory, you're going to be able to do the same thing and keep more people on your payroll. And obviously, if you're a retailer, and some of these retailers, depending on the jurisdiction, depending on whether they're a venue or whether they're a mom and pop bar on the corner, have thousands and tens of thousands, and in some cases, hundreds of thousands of dollars of inventory that are sitting there that because the jurisdiction closed the account, can't safely get to that product. This is an idea, and it's a proposal that would allow everybody that's sharing in this burden to share in the relief.
Bob, I want to hit on this because we are going to be running short on time, but if we would have talked in probably early January and we would have talked about the best way to open a craft brewery, I think we both would have agreed the best way would have been to open a taproom model, sell within your four walls directly to the consumer, and just build your business and your brand that way before you even consider going out to distribution. And in a matter of a couple of weeks in March, that model seemingly got thrown on its head. How would you even advise someone who is looking to open a small brewery at this point?
Well, when we come out of all of this, Justin, there's going to be young women and men, entrepreneurs that want to start a small and independent craft brewery. And, the Brewers Association will be there for them with business critical resources, just like we've been through all of this for our existing members. What we would tell those prospective brewery owners or brewery members is, one, you got to make sure that you're well capitalized and that you have the ability, that you have 6 to 12 months of cash flow at your disposal, given that, who knows what's lurking around the corner. I think you got to recognize that today's beer market is not going to be the beer market in 6 months or 5 years from now. That this is a very dynamic industry, very dynamic community. It's changing very quickly, but there's going to be room for new entrants into the market once the dust settles. But for us, and we're focused on at the Brewers Association right now. Again, is delivering business critical resources to our members who are just thirsty for this information. We did a power hour yesterday, or maybe it was, the days all blur together, but when a leading attorney gave a seminar on how to best access all of the resources for small business owners and hospitality owners from the CARES Act. And we had 1,700 people participate in that power hour. Kind of like I think the numbers that you're seeing here for Brew Talks, we had never seen anything like that. We had to shift our platform like on a dime to be able to accommodate all of those people. The number of visitors we're getting to our COVID-19 resource center on brewersassociation.org is through the roof. We're seeing traffic like you would not believe. And we're delivering resources to them, like, just on the fly, our technical committee was able to put together a resource, how to shut down your draft system for an extended period, and saw record traffic for that. Now we're coming up with a new resource that we just launched, I think, yesterday, and how to restart your draft system when trying to put some positive information out there as well. So that's what we're going to continue to do at the BA, and but it's going to be the future. The future is going to be interesting for sure. And again, I think it all depends on how long this lasts. But every indicator that I see now is this is longer, not shorter.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I 100% agree with you. Until we have a vaccine, everything is uncertain until that point. And we are likely to see ebbs and flows until that happens. We're getting a bunch of audience questions about this. With all the relaxation of 3-tier regulations across the U.S., do you feel that these will quickly revert back to the way it was once this is passed? Or do you think that the consumer will want or even demand these changes to stay in place? And I guess I'd start with you, Craig.
Well, I think some of this depends. I mean, one of the things that we've seen that's been, an immediate from a retail standpoint has been the to-go sales in what previously was the on-premise channels. I got a chicken sandwich I snuck into the office today. We've been working remotely, I think, like most have, for well over 2 weeks. But this is a relatively new restaurant, and we want to see them succeed. But I was there, and I was able to pick up 4 chicken sandwiches and both draft beer and packaged beer to go. And I think that is one of those things that the consumer is going to, they're going to see value in, but depending on that price and depending on how that product is sold, I don't know whether that's going to, continue to be something that the consumer is going to do in a big way or not. I'm amazed at how many of these restaurants have been able and have chosen to make a go of it, changing their format completely. I do think that we're seeing, obviously the whole notion of moving product around is good for convenience, and the whole notion of being able to reposition to meet customers' needs and take what was in the on and provide it in the off, all was very important for this. But this system and this way that it was, I think that we remember that the way that it was is what gave rise to nearly 10,000 brewers. And that's astonishing. I mean, my cohort compadres here have heard me say this so many times they can recite it with me. But, in 1983, there were fewer than 50 breweries in the whole United States. And you look at where we are today, whether it's 7,000, whether it's 8,000, that's an American success story. And that was built against a good backdrop of effective state regulation and important federal regulation, likewise, that kept the largest manufacturers from dictating terms. One of the issues that's getting attention lately is the whole notion of credit and items of value to retail. Everyone needs to think long and hard about what that looks like if the largest manufacturers are able to go in and bankroll retailers and bring us back to a tight house. So I urge caution. I think some of these these convenience items, I think certainly the whole notion of home delivery is getting a real-time kind of shot in the arm boost. People that have not utilized those services before are doing so in record numbers. But there is a way to do this, and there's a way to do this that maintains the integrity for everybody that's involved.
Bob, I'd like to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I will respectfully disagree with my esteemed colleague from the state of Virginia that the current regulatory system is what gave rise to 8,000 small and independent breweries. Come on. What gave rise to that 8,000 small and independent breweries is the entrepreneurial spirit of young men and women who wanted to start something of meaning. Okay, and then that rise was fueled by the beer drinker. That's what happened. That's why there's 8,000 breweries. Now, we certainly support three-tier system, but Greg has heard me say this ad nauseum. It should not be a straitjacket. It should be an evolving doctrine. And these events of the last 3 weeks or maybe 3 months are really going to call into question the existing regulatory system. If breweries, if people can't, if the beer drinker can't go to the brewery is going to have to find a way to go to the beer drinker. And right now we're seeing, states and municipalities relax regulation to allow small businesses to stay afloat through home delivery. And we don't think the sky is falling. Certainly a very small sample early on, but I think, there's going to be some type of reset coming out of all of this.
I think
Justin?
there could be a
Justin?
Yep.
Justin?
Go ahead.
You want to jump in?
This is Jim. Yes, I'd like to harken back to two things Sam Calagione said in the first panel. The first was that he's got a vibrant restaurant business going on in his locations in Delaware. But he said 99% of what we sell comes through the three-tier system. And he also said that it was very important for brewers to stay in the moment. And I think this is a good example of staying in the moment. So we don't know what the future is going to bring. I think you just saw a very good example of the dynamism of the viewpoints and policy positions in the beer business. But it's important for us to kind of stay in the moment and to collaborate on what we can do in front of us. So nobody's got a crystal ball. Certainly things will change or attempts will be made to change some things. But I think at this moment, focusing on phase 4, phase 5, phase 6, and then maybe debating these things down the line would be the best way to go. But it was fun to watch that.
It was absolutely fun, and that's why I want to ask. Maybe once we do get out of this, there's an opportunity to refocus. For the wholesaler on potentially larger, higher volume brands, and there's some give there as well for the smaller brewer to deliver directly or maybe ship to the consumer, which I've seen some brewers like Jester King advocate for.
Saw that today.
So I wonder, what becomes on the table, and because I think there was even a good beer hunting report the other day that some wholesalers are even, deciding which brands they want to focus on at this moment, and some of those are just larger, higher volume brands as we see this stock up go on.
I talked to a small brewer at the beginning of this, and he was asking the questions around the whole notion of feeling like he wasn't getting the attention during some of this pantry building. I said, tell me about your biggest package. He said, well, I sell, 6 packs. I said, well, do you sell 4 6-packs, in a box, and do you have it ready to go like that? And he said, well, no. I said, well, this may be the time that you should do that. And, I think we saw that during this period are brands that haven't seen growth for a long time. And so I think it's regrettable when distributors behave badly. There's no doubt about that. And it's regrettable when folks cut SKUs. I mean, that should never occur. When you take on a brand, and you pledge your best effort. However, I think when you look at the success of this system, and this is where, we can argue around the edges, we can disagree about better ways to go to market. But when you look at DSD and you look at the beer success of the last 3 weeks, of product that's been out there to keep all these folks working and all these folks, kind of demonstrating the whole notion of essential services. We don't know what the folks in at least my constituent companies may be called to do in the coming weeks or months as it relates to this. We do know that beer distributors know how to get the product from point A to point B and know how to meet the needs of thirsty consumers in any retail venue that you can name. So, there's and Bob used a good word, evolution. This system has evolved. direct to consumer sales are allowed in most jurisdictions in one way, shape, or form. And a lot of that has been done in concert with the distributors that sell 99% of Sam Calagioni's beer.
I want to bring this back because we are going to be running short on time here, and I want to get through some of these questions. But I want you all to sort of play along and look into your crystal ball. I know it's difficult right now, but what does the on-premise look like when it returns? What are we going to see? What's a brewery tap room or restaurant look like? What's the future for how, because this is a social industry, we're supposed to be networking at Craig's event, we're supposed to be going down to CBC with 60,000, 30,000 brewers, we're supposed to be going to GABF. We're supposed to be at the Beer Institute's annual meeting in June, in New York. Like what does the on-premise, what does the future of this industry look like in a post-COVID world?
I'll start. I think in a word, different. And when we come out of this initially, I think there's going to be some beer drinkers that are very, anxious to go back to the way things were and will visit on-premise locations as much, if not more, than they used to in an effort to support those local businesses, their local brewery. But I think there's going to be a significant segment of people that are going to want to practice physical or social distancing. So I think on-premise locations are going to be looking at having to reconfigure their spaces and potentially, where you used to see 12 seats at a bar, maybe you see 6. Some tables, piled on top of each other. Maybe they have to reconfigure their physical setting so that they can allow for on-premise consumption, but they still encourage safe physical distancing, social distancing. I think we're going to see 2 different, stops and starts on this. One pre-vaccine and one post-vaccine. My hope is that we'll be able to weather the storm before the vaccine, and that many of our member breweries and Craig's distributors and Jim's members can come through this and last till there's a vaccine, and then it'll be downhill from there. We're still hoping to bring the community. One of the things we pride ourselves on at the Brewers Association is we feel we bring people together. One of our phrases is we build communities, and we are still planning and hopeful that we're going to be able to bring the beer industry together in late September at the Great American Beer Festival in Denver. That's our mindset right now.
Jim, what's the future look like?
I don't know what the future looks like. I hope what the future looks like is a stronger beer industry when this is all over. And I think one of the things that underpins that hope is the fact that we all came together last year and this year on the Beer Growth Initiative. You had John Lane from
the Winking Lizard
from the previous panel, who was part of something called the Alliance for Beer over the last few years, trying to find ways for everyone in the 3 tiers to work together to celebrate beer, to improve beer sales. So whatever it is that the future looks like, I hope it includes a revived growth initiative plus on steroids, really. I mean, we all have to be out there celebrating beer. We all have to be out there promoting beer, and we all have to be out there helping every company sell more beer. So I don't know what the future looks like, but I certainly hope that that's part of the theme of going forward.
Craig, where are we in 12 months?
I think both Bob and Jim are correct. I think it is going to be different. And I think we've got to recognize that if we're going to be thoughtful leaders, thoughtful advocates, folks that are working to bring the industry forward together, it definitely is going to be transformative, what we're dealing with right now. But I do think that we have far more things that unite us than divide us. I think I'm optimistic. I'm a beer glasses half full guy, and I am on this as well. Beer distributors and brewers are the fabrics of America's communities, and I'm optimistic about our ability to continue to move the ball forward together. Jim mentioned the whole notion of the Beer Growth Initiative, which has been a wild industry success story, because we, for the first time, after talking about this for at least the 20 plus years that I've been around, everybody put their differences aside and put their shoulder to the wheel, rolled up their sleeves, and pushed. And that kind of framework, I think, is going to, and that kind of working together is going to be a mistake about it. I think the next few weeks are going to be a challenge. I think we're all going to have to lean on each other. We're going to have to, hug our children and our parents a little bit closer. And if we can't do that physically, because we're not under the same roof, we've got to do that virtually. We've got to communicate with each other like we've never have before. And we've got to keep doing the work that we can to remind people of the greatness of this industry. And the real reason for the greatness of this industry is because its people are really good. And that's where I was to go.
I appreciate the three of you taking the time out to be here today. You mentioned getting back to work and letting the people know how important this industry is. And I need to let you three get back to it. We need to wrap things up here. So thank you, Craig. Thank you, Jim. And thank you, Bob, for being here today. I want to thank everybody for tuning in. We're going to try and do this a little more often in the near future, and probably a little less formally, but look for more of this on brewbound.com. Before I wrap, a big thank you to our AV team, to the Brewbound team, Jess Infante and Jeff Kleinman, as well as Selling Craft Beer, Sean McNulty, for all the help with prep, as well as my other industry friends that want to remain nameless. And again, just thank you all for tuning in, and stay safe, stay healthy out there, and we'll see you next time.